first, I'm going to start on at the beginning, right below the clock, right? Just wait 1 second and it should show up. Frustrating. I thought this was a really great plan. No, I'm not so sure.
No, it's perfect. We're talking about screens and technology. It's just perfect.
Yes. Okay. Well, I have a piece. I have one that I can reference. I'd also just thought about like sending it out as a document so that people could have it in another thing. Okay, I'm just going to get started. Hopefully it will show up, and I will also share the image later. All right, so that was my background, in my like self-directed background. But as a person, I've just always really been. I'm a nerd, and I've always been a movie buff. My first job was at a movie store. It wasn't Blockbuster. Actually, we made fun of Blockbuster because Blockbuster like is owned by the Mormon Church, I think, at the time, or some evangelical organization that controlled the content. So lots of things in the 90s weren't available at Blockbuster for that reason. And I was also really into theater, and I was part of like what I look at now as a self-directed teen theater troupe, where we developed our own screenplays and performed our own work. So this is all like underneath me in my background, right? Some of those experiences doing teen theater, we were teens, we had real issues, we were real people, and that was really intimidating to the large organization that was sponsoring our teen theater troupe. So it was the YMCA, right? So it was YMCA Teen Theater. And so when they came and saw our teen theater performance, they were quite shocked when we were talking about being gay, having abortions, wanting to unalive ourselves. That was very disturbing for some of the people in the larger organization, and they even like sent people into our theater troupe to like help make sure we were making appropriate content. And kind of this conversation about appropriate content is really has a long history with me and my life and family. My cousins weren't allowed to watch anything, like even into their teen years, they weren't allowed to watch anything above PG. So the fact that I could, kind of a contention in our families between my mother and my aunt. And so I see a lot of these, like a lot of fear around screens. I see like this puritanical background to it. And I put down here below theater, I was like thinking, you know, that's just kind of my experience in my lifetime with like theater and media. But I think that theater, I mean, telling stories is such an important, integral part of being human. And, you know, I put the fire here with morals, stories, myths, legends. And as I've been thinking about it, it's all turning upside down. I love it. I've just been thinking about how in the past, what theater and what popular media, how the legends were shared, oral traditions. And as we like right now, we're kind of moving away from the written word and back into sharing oral traditions. Also, I grew up in Missoula, Montana. There's an International Wildlife Film Festival there that was happening all throughout my childhood. So I had access to like the best wildlife films in the world. And so I would just skip school to go see those. It was way better than biology class. I remember all of it. So from a very young age, I've really seen movies and media as tool for learning. and growth. And I was interested in a lot of not what my mom was interested in, and she was really open and okay with me seeing what I wanted to see. I was I think about the things that I watched in the 90s as like between the ages of like 14 and 18, and some of this stuff was really like difficult and disturbing content. But that was I was exploring the great diversity of the human experience. It was really important, and I think that the film is a really incredible way to access that. And down here at the bottom, I was going to say down here at the bottom below the little stage with all the little people, and I made that little guy like Hamlet because I was thinking about like the complexity of the things that that we talk about. And I was where I'm having this ongoing conversation with my 16-year-old. We both know this image of Hamlet, even though we haven't. I was like, I actually haven't seen Hamlet, or if I have, it was so long ago I don't remember. And we're talking about how even though we might not have seen it, we know the cultural reference and kind of know what it's talking about. So that the process of opening up to media is kind of opens up all of these doors. So that's kind of that little image there. And then I put how much money we spend making movies per year, which was $66 billion. And then $2.4 billion we spend on it. And then $60 billion on games. And I'd been thinking about comparing that to like the military budget, but you can't really do that with like the mega military US, but it's about the budget of like the British military. Like that's about as much as they spend on their military. We spend just like creating the movies, not even like distributing them and such. Okay, so now I want to go up above. No, I'll go in the middle. So this is what's so great about this image. It's helping me stay on task. So what I'm kind of offering out, or where I've come to, and what I'm offering this space and this conversation is a human value. In my house, even though we have open screen time, like open access to media and the internet, it's not about the time that they spend on it, but it's that they understand what is valuable time. So like real live humans are only accessible when they're there, and humans are not always going to be there. There's like physically doing something else, or actually physically left, not physically present at all, right? Having left this ethereal plane. And no one is ever going to say to themselves, well, I wish I'd spent more time with that screen, right? So from like this little baby, I put this time thing right next to the baby, but from the very beginning, just an underlying value is that screens were always going to be available. They're kind of immortal. They're accessible. You can always have them, but people, not so much. And so just always, and that if somebody came over, if there was actually like an activity happening where there was human interaction going to be happening, then screens were put down. Or if screens are going to be used, they're like with people, it's in an interactive way, like having an interactive game, or actually all sitting down and watching the same thing together, right? And right now that my kids are now 13 and 16, it's actually a really big deal to them that if we're having like a family movie night, that we're all watching it and paying attention, and we don't have our screens. And it's really important to my 16-year-old. They're so serious about the human value that they're like, I don't want to bring my screen out in public because public doesn't seem like where there should be screens, right? Because it's not like we're out having a social experience with real people. So we're putting the screens away, and screens are great when you have time. And that time is always like when you're kind of not doing other stuff that involves people, So that was easy to implement over like a time limit, because it makes sense, and I think it made sense to them, and it made sense to us, and it was kind of how we use technology as adults as well. So it helped put like, helped us all stay on task with screens. So now we're talking about babies in this very beginning, and the human value that I set out, that we kind of like, how are we going to manage this screen stuff? Well, this is going to be the rule. It's not really a rule, it's an agreement, and it's involving this value. So then it becomes like, what is this content that people, and how scary that content is, right? The internet is a big, scary place. Media is a big, scary place. And I think there's a lot, and there's a lot of ideas that are kind of ingrained in us to maintain children's innocence. And then also worrying about like how exposure to different things will like encourage different stuff. So up here in the next to the clock is a little baby character. The little baby character, it says innocence and protection from what? So I like to try to deconstruct why I might be uncomfortable with something, and make sure that and I wrapped up the baby. Have you guys heard of the idea like wrapping them in cotton batting, right? This is like keeping this like perfect little innocent thing, perfect and innocent forever. So that's kind of the idea there that I thought. And I thought, what do they, what are you trying to protect when you like wrap up, when you protect, what are you trying to protect? And I thought that a lot of that wrapping was privilege and racism and homophobia and sexism and all of these things that you want to protect your kids from. And that's kind of a really personal and intricate thing for each person. But how I've navigated that, and this is why, is kind of taking all of those threads, the threads of privilege and racism and homophobia, and I've nailed down like 4 things. These are like little building blocks down here to like prep early on. So this is like 1 to 5, 1 to 6 years old. These were kind of like our guiding principles. One was that screens are tools. And then the biggest one is like these 4 fakes. And these 4 fakes that the media constantly shows us that are so important for people to realize are not the reality, and that are fictionalized versions of these important life events, is birth, death, police, and romance. And almost all of the depictions of these 4 really important things about life are portrayed in media inaccurately, or without nuance, without depth. And I kind of put in parentheses what that underlying thing is. Birth might be like, I feel like it's, when I had a baby, I was like, this is nothing like I've seen it on TV. And it's like the first time it's ever happened to you. That's another part about you. A lot of these things aren't really available to you, or you may never interact with them except for within the media. So I feel like, so in the 1 to 5 range, I was really, I wasn't controlling about content, but I was like, because at that age, it's kind of what they have access to. I kind of curated the content more and was very particular about how much exposure they got to things that were drastically outside of like the nuance I wanted them to understand. For instance, like no Paw Patrol, like no like, friendlyization of the carceral state. Then let's see, romance, like big talks, not a lot of like Disney pre 1980, really nervous about that. We're like lots of conversations. We did not watch Peter Pan, Cinderella, Snow White. We just didn't watch it. And what's so great is there's so much content out there, you don't have to. It's not like when we were kids, when I was a kid, where that was like, you know, what else are you gonna watch, right? So these are also like places to insert healthy dynamics. Studio Ghibli, all of the Studio Ghibli movies have really amazing relationship dynamics and like healthy male-female friendships that aren't based in romance, or if it is, it's really light and appropriate. So I felt like 1 to 5 was really setting where I had, that was like the only part of the like life stage where I had a lot of chance to like set the stage and then build this like family culture as a block. And also share a lot of information about behind the scenes stuff so that everybody really understood like behind the scenes. And I just kind of have these little puppets above the screen, effects, computer graphics, stereotypes, tropes, like under, you know, kind of sharing all of this like creative work that goes into the screens, not just like, again, screens are tools, it's not passive. So sharing those details. And then as, you know, probably like 6 till now, and I did this like exposure eye, so like, oh no, what will they see? And how will you navigate that? And this like scary door of the unknown, and how we can transform that scary door into a window of opportunity, really. I'm really big into harm reduction. And there's really nothing that I don't want to have a conversation with my kids about. If they're like, if they come to me or if it comes up in the world, like I'm ready to tell you my opinion, right? So just transforming this like scary place into an opportunity has been really fun. And then that's kind of like, you know, after the kids are like tweens and teens, I just really appreciate this opportunity. And it draws me back down here into the bottom corner, this web of connections, which is like all the ways that media and pop culture can like help us share about so many different parts of the human experience in a really visceral way. So I want to kind of pull back for a second. So funny. I just want to like stop sharing that board for a second. It for some reason wants me to do that at the same time. Okay. I just want to kind of pull back and open up the conversation about like where we're uncomfortable with media, and if anybody wants to share about like how they, you know, those 4 birth, death, police, romance, how those things come out in media, and if anyone has any like comments or questions that open up a dialogue about how that comes out in your relationship with kids, or your nervousness about sharing or exploring different content, just feel free to unmute.
I was going to share really quickly. Sorry for the kid noise. Oh, hold on. Wait. I'll try to share later.
I'm excited to hear.
I'm curious about like what kind of pushback you see with your own kids. Because I work at a center, and you know, all the centers have to come up with agreements with the kids about how to approach this topic. And when we do that process together, and what we're currently dealing with is like a couple outliers, kids who, because of their family agreements of like no screens at home, they rely on our space to play and game that way and stuff. So and then they just sort of don't feel like aligned with our community values. So we experience pushback like in that way a lot, but I'm wondering what the pushback looks like in your family, if there is something to report on that.
My kids have helped me like rein in my own social media use. You know, they've expressed to me they're like, I feel like it's a screen use is a family issue that we're like constantly like navigating around. And I really feel for you with especially with kids who use a center for their access to screens and media, and how that can really like kind of divides the community and the kids. And I find that if you have kids that have a really controlled time limits, and then they get to places where they don't have time limits, again, they're going to prioritize, because what's the scarcity here? And that was the part of the human value that is really key, is that we basically like tried to focus on the human value being the scarcity, right? So that you're chasing the thing that isn't available very much, and that isn't screens. Screens are totally available, right? I wish I had better, you can't change it like the how people handle screens at home. And I just want to say that I really wanted the conversation not to be about like time, but that ends up being what it is at home. And then that transfers into there. And I mean, I do an online program, and I still get comments about the online program being too much on the screen, which is like, I'm like, I'm like, what do you want from me as a facilitator? Sometimes I'm just like lost on that. Because we want this to be like a physically interactive, or we don't see how it's like the same level of interaction and connection as being in a physical space. But it doesn't feel like that when you're like in a physical space with people, right? Like if I'm sitting around with my friends, and this has happened as an adult, and they're like on their phones, like scrolling. Oh, it's really like a societal problem, it's a culture issue, not a specifically kid issue. And I follow that issue on as an adult, and model that I care about screen addiction by like following and sharing the Center for Humane Technology. Now that my 16-year-old is really into documentaries, like watching documentaries that are coming out about social media, and you know, they have a pretty good grasp of some of the toxicity happening there, and their interaction with it is very light. But I know that isn't the same with everyone. Yeah, so modeling good behavior, continuing to have that conversation. Yeah, I feel like my kids are actually better at this stuff than I am sometimes. Go ahead, Stephanie, you unmuted.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Just kind of along those lines where my brain goes a lot, and I know, and please let me know if this is like getting away from your focus for today. Is in how people use screens. Like, what's the function of it for a lot of kids? I'm a child therapist, and so this comes up a lot when I work with kids and families. And I feel like screens are often an escape, like whether it's video games or YouTube or whatever kids are consuming, and just like the emotional impact. And I think what you mentioned about scarcity is really important. I think that's really tied into it. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts, or if anyone has any thoughts from like an unschooling perspective on ways to support families in navigating some of this.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that like I try to pull away from the term screens as just like a broad term that so in we'll go back to my image in a minute, but really like one of the building blocks of it is that screens are a tool. And how is it a tool? Well, it's a marketing tool, it's a creation tool, it's a connection tool. It is an escape tool. It's all of these different things. So it's like, what is the person doing? You know, and then also this back in this coming from a place of like non-judgment around what other people do with their time and whether it's valuable to them. Now, it might not look valuable to you because you're not especially interested in that thing. And also deep dives into subjects like within an unschooling family look like, you know, just super immersive for a certain amount of time. So that also, you know, is kind of a scary thing to navigate in terms of time management. But I guess it's hard for me to be like, if I was, that's just my first thing is just like screens. Maybe they're using that to actually connect with other kids and it's part of their social network. Or like for a long time, my oldest was really into watching birth videos on YouTube of people like giving birth. It was like reality show of people giving birth and they just loved that. And it was just a really, I think they were only like 6 or 7 years old. It was an interesting like hyperfixation for a moment that I had to navigate around. Or other things that I haven't like, that was pretty comfortable. Like lots of unboxing videos wasn't especially comfortable at first because I'm not super into capitalism or toys or whatever, but there was also this underlying review, like learning how to review a product, learning how to like deconstruct what makes something valuable and to like maybe check on whether or not you want to buy something in advance through watching unboxing videos, right? My partner's photography watches unboxing videos all the time and new equipment, see what if he wants to get it or whatever. So just like kind of like a kid version of an adult expression, right? And I think that that's also the thing that's kind of scary when kids are on screens is what they're doing there is like kid like, you know, it doesn't seem very serious or useful, but this comes back to kind of like being okay with that innocence. So people want that innocence, but then like they're like, why aren't you being more serious and doing more adult things, right? I feel like that's kind of the balance that people need to figure out. Does anyone else have any comments about their journeys with this that they'd like to share?
I'm going to try again.
Sorry.
Really quickly, the kids might come back. I just wanted to share. Most of this stuff for me feels like doing my own inner work, like all the ways I'm a 1999 kid too, 42, and I'm approaching these tools very differently than my kids generationally. So like trying to manage my triggers and manage like my issues in ways that they don't necessarily share those things. But one of the big triggers for me is around the industry. So like the marketing, the psychology, the profiting, the capitalism around it. And as I navigate this with the kids, another trigger for me is like they're coming into their tweens. And so as their peers become more crucial voices for them, influence for them, the marketing is so deep. Like we're in that stage where a friend says, you should play this game. And so now I should play this game. And so what does it look like to cultivate critical thinking skills, to cultivate like their own individual self-directed journey in the midst of feeling the capitalist machine so deeply culturally, and it puts me into an anxious state. So like, what do I do? Like, what do I do with that as I'm trying to walk with them in like a non-anxious way? Hope that.
I would just say trust yourself, because I bet that your family culture that you're building in your family around these capitalist, like that capitalist anxiety. I mean, I don't know you, but I can tell just by how much you care about this, that that will permeate and be is the like the soil. And that has really, I've realized that some of the things that my kids are not getting into is just because of that family culture, right? My mom was raised in like with a lot of body shaming and conventional ideas of beauty standards, and really susceptible to the marketing. She had a she had an eating disorder. My grandmother was like, every way you look is always wrong, that was kind of her space. And my mom raised me completely differently. And now I'm like, body stuff is just a whole different reality in my home. And so when it comes up, it feels like alien to them. And I'm seeing how just being like exposed to that marketing doesn't mean that they'll like buy into it when you set such a rich soil.
I mean, I feel as we're on a self-directed journey, that for me, it's the balance of like, how do I show up in our family with my values, and model and cultivate, but not be so heavy-handed. Like it's this hello, I'm talking right now in the conference. It's this balance of like, how do I not be like constantly critical and allow them to explore. Anyway, that's all I'm gonna say.
I would just I want Alicia, if Alicia wants to share, I'm just a second, I want to share something real quick. At one point we were living with my mother, and she made a comment about my oldest was watching something like kind of out loud in the main space, and my mom came at them with a critical eye on that. And the day after that, they just put on their headphones and they didn't want to be watching publicly anymore. And it was like this real lesson for us as a family, that like it was really important how we reacted to their interests and what they were doing, because if it was a fine line that they felt like shamed or they needed to hide the content, and we didn't want that. So it was like, I was like, oh, and they even like, I was just the other day talking about, Rowan told me that it took them years of their childhood, they're 16, so they can kind of talk about it, to feel comfortable watching stuff with the family again, or like sharing their content again. So that was part of our process. Alicia, do you want to share? Because I actually was going to draw a goat somewhere on the screen, but I can't draw a goat very well.
That's awesome. I kind of feel like I'm cheating because Brooklyn and I have had several conversations about this. But also just in terms of the thing you were just talking about, there are certain YouTube channels or YouTube videos that my son really enjoys, that just the noise of it. Like if I'm not paying attention, it's like characters with these, anyway. I have to watch myself, my own sensory needs, and put in headphones or put in earplugs sometimes, just because like, okay, like is there a true problem with this video or this content, or is it just some screechy noises or something are bothering me? That's a big one for me. Just where I'm at. Okay, so I'm gonna elaborate on the cultural scapegoat. So I think that in families where, so I think a lot of us here, probably connection is one of our like main goals in our family, right? But I think in a lot of families, it's not as much that way for a variety of reasons, right? Maybe there's some people don't have the time, right? If you're working 3 jobs or, and like just family dynamics are different everywhere. I mean, and people are at different places dealing with their own stuff, right? And so, so I think that, I think it's easier to blame, the ills of society on screens because they're first of all, chronologically new in terms of history. And then also because even just in little personal things, it used to be really easy for me to like blame any kind of like my kid, like, so my kid, like I have expectations, like emptying the dishwasher or something like that. And I'm like, my kid knows this. And yet she's just sitting there on her iPad or whatever it is, you know what I mean? Like where like, I'm like, oh, it's the screen. She's like, just instead of like looking at like solving the problem together, I just jumped to, it's too much screens and like, she can't keep up with expectations because she just gets too into the screens. But once we started having more of a collaborative family structure, we started talking about like awarenesses, like I'm feeling this way when like if this thing hasn't been done and you're on the screen, my first thought is to blame the screen, but I'm realizing now that you might just be really interested in what it is that you are watching, doing, playing, whatever. How can we navigate this together? And then obviously we see it like, I mean, we see it like on you know, with the propaganda and with like obviously with like school shootings and all kinds of other like traumatic things in society. People are like, oh, it's because those video games or, you know, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of, you know, on the personal level, cultural scapegoat in the family, but then also like in a big sense, you know, if you watch CNN or whatever, you'll hear it that way.
Yeah. This is a great segue into these Yasmin's questions. I'm going to go to the second one real quick, and then we'll go back to managing privacy and security. Non-negotiables. So I'll speak to like shooters first. I feel like my opinion is that people have an innate need to do target practice because target practice is really important skill for being alive on the planet as in different ways, you know, historically. And in our bones. So I feel like that's what people want to do. They want to like strategize and they want to do target practice. And I just feel like that's an innate thing. When the kids were really young, we stuck towards like more stylized, you know, or yeah, we do shooters, but I will not personally purchase with my money war, like Call of Duty. For instance, like there's some like ways that games position themselves and or funding from like military organizations that like, I'm just like, if you play that, you could play that, but I'm not going to pay for it. And I, when they were younger, they wanted to do like buy a prison management game. That was like, no, I will not pay for that. And I don't want that to happen. And they pushed really hard for it. And then we made an agreement. So I made them watch the documentary, The 13th, and then I would buy it for them. Because I was just like, and actually, my son was really young. He was only like 8 or 9, and he only made it like halfway through the film because it's obviously a really intense subject. And I feel like he was really emotional. He'd had enough. He'd gotten the point. I don't know if that was like a great plan, but like that was the only way that it was really gonna like work for me as a person. So that's kind of was I have non-negotiables, but they aren't about what, you know, one of my non-negotiables that I still hold to this day is we will never watch Pocahontas. I've never watched Pocahontas. We will never have Pocahontas play. And it's funny how my kids were talking about like that's like the Disney movie that they've never seen and they'll have to watch it somewhere else, not at my house. So I feel like it's okay to hold like moral and ethical boundaries around content. But I feel like you're mostly holding them for, you know, you hold them for yourself and then like for like that you're the one putting out resources for the content, you know, so you have like real boundaries around what works there. And then also maybe you have some further knowledge about the the way a certain type of content affects your kids, you know, where my kids might be totally fine with some types of violent content, other kids might not be for whatever reason. So I feel like people can really, that's really personal. Okay, what I got. Yes, the four fakes are always an understanding learning opportunity at every age. I'm really like, as I mentioned before, like as a person and as a educator and parent, I'm really into harm reduction. So all the information is always available and accessible. And when I see something reflected in media, I'm really open about my opinions and my own reflections on that experience or how I feel about it. For instance, like Beauty and the Beast, I think that kind of falls into like the wishy-washy character. You know, we didn't watch a lot of princess content, but I was really particular about not playing that one because I felt that it really shows an unhealthy dynamic around male violence, and that like this beautiful woman will just come and somehow transform this, do all of these things to transform the violence in a person, which I thought was a really unhealthy thing to push as any kind of reality in a relationship. So, and those movies, what I was saying is like, those movies are so, we play them really young, and I feel like they really set the stage. And now that I'm talking to my 16-year-old about these issues, they speak a lot to how Studio Ghibli and the role and how those relationships played out in how they thought about romance and connection and multi-gendered connection and such. Well, so if your kid asked you to watch, they couldn't watch it. See, and that's the thing, is the part where I'm curating is hardly like, is almost a time frame where it's like, I'm just in charge of the variety of movies that we have offered. But by the time that they are asking to watch some movie, usually I would be, we would watch it together and then talk about it. And Pocahontas is just a really particular one because we have Indigenous heritage and it's like offensive to us personally. So it's like the learning is like this standing for what's right and just, and that film is not it. So it's not really that I don't want them to like, they know all about Pocahontas, but that's yeah, and they could watch old Disney movies at this point, right? That's not, but we're going to be having conversations about representation and history at the same time. Yes, I absolutely love watching content with bad values. That gives a lot of opportunity to, those are those windows of opportunity, and they're all over the place in media, right? So that's that was really this dark unknown of like bad content, and then just really like what is bad values. I'm like, what do we consider bad content? And like really like I think that we can internally dissect what that means to us, and then also think about how, you know, as this idea that screens are a scapegoat, meaning that they're like kind of independent and giving us stuff, but actually they're a reflection of who we are, right? They're a reflection of real humans and real human stories, and a lot of those stories that are being told right now are the colonial story, are the sexist story, are the racist story. Like, I am tired of a detective and a cop being a part of like every movie, you know, of all ages. And there's just like a new show coming out. There's like, they have cops in the afterlife. I'm like, are you kidding me? Can we please not put a cop everywhere? Cops aren't in my life. You know, I'd like try really hard to keep them out of my life. I'm not calling the cops. So anyway, building this, not giving people access, like, okay. there's a part of this that I had skipped over, which was that like when I was thinking about violent content going into like my kids not being tiny babies and whether or not to like protect them from certain things, I thought a lot about the privilege of being protected from certain things. The privilege of being able to just like never interact with gun violence, right? Or the privilege to like not have to struggle with poverty. And I, as a person who's raising kids with a lot of privilege, I didn't feel like that I should add to that by controlling and making sure they didn't even have access to see these other things that were existing, right? And I always feel like it's a responsibility to expose them to these things while I have a chance to communicate with them about it. Because it's not, I'm going to lose that opportunity. And since I didn't bring it up before, they're not going to feel safe bringing it up to me. And then like kind of on a meta sense, we can start discussing how this reflection of our world is not what we want and discuss what we do want or how we do want our relationships to be. Yesterday, we were watching something and, my 16-year-old is always dissecting whether or not a relationship in a film or movie is healthy or not. Like, is this a healthy dynamic is like a game my 16-year-old plays with the films that they watch. And so that is like that's like parenting like moment. I'm really like proud of that for them because I'm hoping that will lend to them being really critical about the kinds of relationships that they go into and navigating away from like manipulation and abuse is super important to me. And media shows real human experiences and the nuance of that. So it gives really great ins on how complex relationships can be. So I'm a domestic violence survivor. So I want my kids to understand that violence doesn't come from like this outer space thing far away that you can keep far away, that it's about interpersonal dynamics. Keeping yourself safe isn't about like stranger danger. It's about understanding red flags, what are red flags, and how so much of the media, around one of the 4 fakes was romance. I was ruined by that, in some ways. The way that romance was presented to me in media was like, I didn't have a model in my life of a working partnership. So everything I learned in media was what I knew. And it's like love bombing makes really good film. It's also a red flag. So I've been talking for a while. Let me go back. Yeah. Yes, we talk a lot about white supremacy in media. And I guess, Yasmin, I'm just curious. I feel like I would have to block all content to block white supremacy in media content. And we're actually just working, my 16-year-old and I were just making a list of, on my thing, I'm not going to bring it back because I kind of like just talking to you guys. And then I'll share the illustration and you guys can take that with you. But a purposeful diversity. So I feel like as you're offering content, you set a stage for the kind of content very young, or whenever you're setting a stage for global content. I have some recommendations, like we really love G Kids, everything on G Kids. So that was like, it's just a resource for accessing diverse content. And just a couple documentaries about misrepresentation in film and in media that I think are really important things that if you can share as a family, it'd be helpful. The Celluloid Closet is one about LGBT representation in media, and Real Engine, which is about Native American, North American Native representation in film. we also use, I really have been happily paying for YouTube Premium for my whole family, and that makes it so we don't ever see ads. They're still there's still sponsorships, so there's still sort of ads, but no device in my life plays YouTube ads, and there's lots of them when I get on there. So that's kind of like a boundary. I really like media, but I really hate ads, so I was definitely somebody that left TV, was happy to leave the TV world and into the streaming world, and I still don't want to see ads.
I feel like for us, it's like holiday time and the kids are just watching Christmas movies. And I'm like, okay, this is the 8th all white Christmas movie that you've watched. Can I please influence this time? Like, what is it like to have even a democratic conversation? A lens on that. And sometimes it's just,
you cut off, but I feel you on that. And I was thinking about, even though things like diversity and is getting better, it's still bullshit. So it's been like for the Indigenous community and for Indian country, it's been a really great few years for representation, but it's still like really just like a little bit of like seeds of content, and you have to like dig it out to find it and to find authentic stuff. There was another movie about like representation and how the media portrays different groups. I haven't seen this film, but it's on our like family list. Is like Black Enough for Me. It was on HBO Max, so that's on our list to start learning more about the history of media and representation and kind of dissecting that as a family. I only now with a 16-year-old am I like getting my suggestions. Now they want my suggestions now. It's so exciting. But like basically it was pretty hard to find things that we all wanted to watch together for quite a while. I think that, there was a few years it was just like Star Wars is what we watched together. And the rest of the time it's kind of like independent. My mom watched a bunch of Scooby-Doo with my son. It's like nobody else wanted to, like we watched it.
Just wanted to add that I totally agree that it's almost impossible to keep white supremacy or whatever away from kids. We watched Black Panther, the first and the second one with my little ones. And I didn't realize until we were in the middle of watching it that I had to actually stop it and say, it was a radical Black person and a sort of moderate Black person. And the radical Black person is actually not so wrong in the first one. And then the second one having to be like, well, the radical indigenous Mayan from the underworld is actually not so wrong in what he wants, maybe just in the way he goes about it. The descendants as well, we had to stop and be like, Uma, who just wants her people to be free, is not so wrong. So even when you have diversity and even when you have representation, you're having to manage between like what kind of diversity it is and what kind of representation it is. And yeah, it's not so easy.
The pause button is your friend.
A lot of pause. Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, the pause, like somebody has the pause button and be like, wait, and you pause, and then we're like, blah, 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 blah. And like, okay, go again. It is like that's constantly, you can barely get through anything without pausing and deconstructing, because it's not just, I think kids are ready and capable of these conversations though. And and they get better at it the more conversations that you have, and they care about your opinions and they care about the world and the stuff. It's not scary. What's scarier is that that's the reality that the screens are emulating. Like what's scary isn't that content is bad. It's that we know that that's actually just a reflection of the real people who made that content. So problematic.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, especially in the case of those examples, it's like we often people who are on the more progressive side end up fighting each other instead of whatever, we perceive the real enemy to be, and that happens all the time. And that's actually something that I'm happy to have the chance to point out, because that is something that's really reflective of what I go through, that in progressive circles we end up fighting each other, the more radical against the more, and it
And
doesn't
the
help at all.
landscape has changed, right? Like we watch, we're a queer family. My 16-year-old's fully out. All this, I'm like, let me show you this movie from when I was a teenager. That was like, nobody made a movie like this. It's like How to Be a Cheerleader, or How to Be a Cheerleader with Natasha Lyonne. And it's like a dark comedy about all of these like teenage kids that get put into this conversion therapy camp. And I loved it too. I at the time I thought it was awesome, but it didn't hold up as much. Like we were kind of like, oh, it was kind of cringy for like the reality of like LGBT rights now, right? And I had to come to this like, yeah, back then it was like we were making fun of ourselves. That was like just to have the space to like make fun of the being made fun of, right? That was like mind-blowing, right? At that time, and now it just feels like me. Right? So it was interesting to kind of pull out some things that I thought were that just kind of blew my mind, and how they aged, and then having that conversation to be like how society has changed, and how society is changing, and then how we can change society, and how like our lives can support what we want to see. And if we're artists, how can our art reflect what we want to see? How can we write a story without a cop, right? Or like some writers like, how can we write a story without a human in it? Like, how can we decenter humans completely? And sometimes media is a really great place to explore those kinds of like metaphors and symbols. My family really liked the Marcel the Shell. Marcel the Shell is just a really beautiful stop motion movie. It kind of deconstructs social media, and my family really like appreciated the complexity of that film, and how it and how it addressed the subject. And my kids are 12 and 16, and we watched that together and just really loved it. So exploring. We can continue to explore and dissect media right now. Anybody have anything that that's making them uncomfortable? That was kind of one of the questions that I had coming in. I'm like, I wonder if these people will share, if anybody will share stuff that makes them feel like scared or icky, and maybe we can help them through that.
I just had a question about navigating the space of like when you're trying to like do the pause thing and dissect a bigger issue, and the kids don't want to go there with it. Like I'm thinking about, I'm a facilitator in an ALC where we have mostly young kids, like 5, 6, 7, 8, and mostly this is coming up in reading a book in particular, but we're starting to kind of dive into the screen usage and stuff. And I found sometimes they're willing to talk about it just like a micro bit, but a lot of times they're like, oh, okay, whatever, like we want to just keep reading the book, or like we want to just keep watching the thing. So like, how do you kind of tease that out when you really want to like, oh, this is a really important message we need to talk about, but they're like, no, I just want to watch the thing.
So I was a really socially justice minded child. I was like doing crazy social justice stuff when I was like 9 or 10. Just like I think back on it, I don't know what was motivating me. I was just like, and I kind of expected that my kids would be like that, or I could make them like that they would want to like interact with these like real, and I was actually thinking about content like nonfiction concepts, like even if like they're dealing kind of connecting nonfiction real life stuff to the fiction story. And I decided just to be okay with waiting, because after I'm 42 and I'm totally overwhelmed at times with the state of the world and the grief that comes with our current situation. So I was like, okay, well, if they don't want to look, like if they're not ready to take a magnifying glass to it, then I'm fine with that, right? Because they'll come to it on their own. And they did, in different ways, in the ways that they saw oppression affecting their communities online, or their friends, or family. And I even have in here, like, don't push reality too early, because I felt like if I was like, hey, pay attention to current events. First of all, that is so big. Like, I can barely hold that. So how could I ask a kid to? And I can see why they're like, right? So just kind of accepting that, and that's like the safety and innocence part, the ability to be okay with not interacting with this really like difficult, grief-stricken thing that is current events. I think it would be different if we lived in like a working society, or if, like, you know, if we didn't live in a culture of white supremacy, we wouldn't be having these conversations, but we do. And so I'm like, okay, be fine with this innocence, be fine in this space, just play and enjoy. And then I'm modeling that I care about that on the side. And then that frees both of us to be where we with it. And the social justice that I'm giving you is treating you is the self-directed learning. So I don't need to like point out at this moment, because I'm like showing you liberation through self-directed learning and self-directed learning values. And I'm going to be there and ready to talk to you about this stuff when you are. And you know, and my personal experience that just has come out, I couldn't have told you this like 2.5 years ago, but we're all watching, my family watches news together. We watch the Philip DeFranco show on YouTube, which is like a really short little YouTube. It's not made for kids though. And we're watching it as a family, like daily thing, talking about pausing each time, talking about these issues. My 16-year-old is like, that's not enough for them. So now they're watching Democracy Now! But I absolutely didn't like if they said no or they weren't interested, I had to just kind of hold that. And especially as like an activist and a person who like would love it if my kids had just like come out of the womb with a sign that I didn't give them, which I did. Like, it was something that I couldn't push, because I would have pushed them completely away. So I would just have patience for that innocence in that space and let them have it, because they won't have it for long. Eventually you have to face all of these things. So. Sabrina, did you want to say something? I'm going to go back over to the chat, make sure I'm not missing anything. Feel free to unmute if anyone has something to say out loud.
I have a question about the battle between like in-person socializing when people are there versus screens, which is a huge topic with adults too, as you pointed out, because people will use their phones when they're in a group with adults when they're supposed to be talking to each other. But I was thinking like about the weirdness of like kids don't always control who comes over to your house. And like they don't, you know, they didn't plan necessarily to hang out with somebody. And even if you kind of tell them in advance, you know, it's like, did they really want to do that right now? And I was thinking about my nieces, because they have this constant thing where they always want to watch movies. They're 6 and 2 on their tablets and different screens, even when like me and my dad go visit them. I'm their aunt, he's the grandpa. And my sister gets really frustrated with them. And like sometimes I do, but I feel like it's so much easier when I don't just try to like force them off the screen to see me. Like if I have something else to do with them, I can kind of eventually coax them to come do it with me, because there's like something to hold their, I don't know. I'm just wondering what you think about all this.
Oh, I think that trying to coax somebody to not watch a screen without actually having an activity is pretty like it's really difficult. And I find that that I haven't had much luck, and that if I wanted the kids to get off the screens, especially at those young ages, I definitely have to prepare something or have some idea of something more exciting that I would offer, like, hey, instead of that, this. And then as far as like family obligations and connecting with people, I guess that was probably a kind of a line that I held harder than I would hold other lines. And since we had no time limits, like I'm literally telling you, so and so is going to be here for 2 hours, and then you go back to your screen and you can be on it all night, right? Because all night is free time, and these people are only here for 2 hours. So it's like, you know, whether that was completely self-directed or, you know, how flexible that was in my values, I don't have to worry about it anymore though, because it's just become an integrated value that my kids have, that I came from that.
It's so hard when like you're not the parent, because like I'm the aunt, but I'm close to my nieces and I love my sister. Like I don't think she's a good mom. Like it's not about that. I don't want to start fights with her over anything. But then it's like she'll restrict their time on the screens, not as heavily as some people, but still a good amount. And they're always fighting over it, like when people are not over too. So then it becomes a battle when I'm there, because then because they don't get it, you know, and it's like, and then it's like interfering with my ability to socialize with my nieces. So it's like a whole thing. And it's like, what the heck do I even do?
Amanda, you have a response?
Hi, I'm Leah. This is my sister, Amanda.
Hi. Sisters. Perfect.
Hi, Natalia. So
with 6 and 2-year-olds.
Yeah, our kids are
my God.
4, 5, 6,
That's
3
perfect.
between the two of us, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I wanted to share something that I learned last year. I was on a webinar. Maybe many of you have met or been on webinars with her before too, but Crystal Bird Farmer, she runs an ALC here in the States, and she was doing a bit about just media consumption. She said something which she doesn't limit screen time, and was talking a bit about that. And she said something that really clicked for me when I'm in those similar situations, like you said, Natalie, with like my daughter who's 4, almost 5 now, and this helped me kind of when she's like really engulfed in something and I want her to stop something on the screen, is Crystal said, one way you can start to connect with the person is rather than just being in this conflicting, like, get off the screen, it's time to stop now, I've decided it's time to stop, is like, have you stopped to actually engage with your child to understand what it is that's so interesting to them about this. So like maybe in the moment, don't get into like, the goal right now is I must stop them as quickly as possible from turning off the screen and doing, whether it's just to end the amount of screen time or to do, you know, unload the dishes, Alicia said, but really stopping and saying, okay, so Vivi, she's, you know, 4.5, why are you not wanting to stop? So like, what's so interesting to this about you? And actually, like, then sometimes I actually stop and end up just finishing watching that episode or that show with her. Like, I'm like, okay, instead of me stopping you in this moment, you're really fixated on finishing this episode or this movie. Let me actually try to understand what's so interesting about it. Let me join you in this activity, rather than it always being about like, you need to stop at the moment I say stop. And so I wonder if sometimes when you're trying to connect with your niece and nephew at your sister's house, as I'm sometimes going to my sister's house and see my little 4-year-old nephew, is when they're really fixated, I try to actually join them in the activity and actually understand what they're trying to learn, what makes them get enthusiastic with them. Oh, really? You're watching Xavier Riddle in the Secret Museum. You really like this story that you're learning about. What's so interesting about this story to you? And that's helped me then, you know, even at the end of that episode, then being able to transition to something else, because I actually joined them in the activity, and instead of judging them for why are you watching so long, try to understand what's captivating them.
Yeah, I feel like that's the approach I've tried to take sometimes. And then it becomes like, if my sister really wants to enforce the no, they have to get off, and I'm busy trying to, then it becomes this whole thing. But I feel like I need to just like model harder, like sitting with the kids and watching their show with them. I mean, she does that sometimes. She's just tired and busy, you know. I don't have to live with them 24/7, so it's not the same. But I just feel like, you know, sometimes they really want to watch stuff, and they do want me to watch them with it. They'll even invite me, the bigger girl especially. So I feel like that's good advice. But also I'm thinking about how to connect whatever they're watching to other stuff, like other activities too, so it doesn't feel like such a disjuncture. Like if they're interested in something in the show, they probably would like things related to that, you know?
And the more you engage with them in that way, you might be able to suggest things that are along the line of what's intriguing them so much. The more you're a co-learner and interested person with them, you know?
Yeah.
We're running, like, we ended 11:30, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, shoot.
I want to just, it's not a lot of time, but I just want to touch on the security and privacy, kind of like the online danger piece. There was a question up there about that. And one thing I think that kind of protected my family is unschooling and late reading and writing. It's kind of just a weird side benefit of not being very young online, but not being able to do a lot of like complex writing that other really young kids are doing online. So when kind of like before the age of reason, right, and like Catholicism, where there's like an age of reason, so we'll just say like 12, 13 or whatever, some kind of like further capacity for critical thinking comes around. And before that, there's this huge world open and all of these, and access to all of these like possible predators and dangerous stuff. And my 16-year-old and I were talking about how they just kind of were, when they were in those spaces, or if they looked at, they weren't really reading comments when they were very young. They weren't participating in comment threads or doing, and when they started typing and writing, we used a lot of like, it was for messaging each other directly. And then we just had a lot of conversations about going into public digital spaces with the same kind of like safety ideas that you would have in a physical space. Not to just go home with strangers, right? Even in like a digital way, and to understand that, I didn't want to say like, oh, you can never interact with anybody that you haven't met in person, but obviously that was kind of like, the tone that, and the value that we kind of set around like public online spaces. So those are some of the ways that we've dealt with it. We have a really open family culture, and I have internet trauma. So I've talked a lot about how much the internet can hurt a person, how like these spaces can be toxic for people. And so we share a lot of our personal experiences with the kids, and to get them healthily nervous and with a good skeptic eye on like people and links, and like, we talk constantly about scams, how they're targeting, who they're targeting. Just kind of, as nerds, we have like an ongoing conversation about this kind of like of nerddom, and that really helps. And if you're not a nerd, find a nerd or a nerd channel to help you. There's going to be somebody out there that can put it together, can share details about how to stay safe online. And they're very intelligent. Does anyone else want to talk a little bit about like safety online and their experience and how to navigate that? Yeah, 4 minutes. Not much. Common sense media. When I'm in a center, I use common sense media for what different age groups can access at the center. So that has nothing to do with what I do as an unschooler at home, but I feel like there's in a center, there's a little professionalism, and there's a space, and it's a professional space, it's a public space, and I use common sense media to determine what is appropriate content for different age groups. So so that just feels safe for me as a facilitator, and for the variety of parents coming from different places on the spectrum. And that's not a like personal value judgment on the content, but like what is appropriate content for this age group in a public community space. And I use common sense media. Thank you for sharing that, Alicia.
Yeah, and I was just want to say I have a couple highly sensitive kids, and I don't necessarily go by the ages, the common sense media like all the states for my own kids, you know, and making decisions. But it's really nice to read the spoilers to know like what happens and what the violence is like and what the, you know, just. And then there's also a website if anybody else is curious. There is it's like, I can't remember what it's called. It's like the dog dies, or the dog dies at the end or something. Have you guys heard of this? And it tells you if it has a sad ending or a happy ending before you watch it, which has actually helped frame a lot of like getting ready to watch certain movies. And I think it's based on like Old Yeller, right? So like that's kind of what their thought process was in naming it, but it's something like that. Does the dog? Yes. Yeah, that. Yes. Thank you, Natalie.
Yeah, I don't use the common sense. I don't use age guidelines at all. And my youngest, when he was like 3, his content was like 6-year-old content. He was like 3 years old, loved Rough Ruffman, which is for 6-year-olds. And then he's always been like 3 years. What he's interested in is, you know, given to people 3 years older than him. And I'm glad that I didn't force him to like watch Barney when he wanted to watch Rough Ruffman. Right. And it was just like, even though there's so much in what he was watching in Rough Ruffman that he didn't understand or wouldn't seem like he could have, because it was way ahead of, you know, what we're told 3-year-olds can comprehend, but he just absolutely loved it. So that's continued.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's also IMDb Parents Guide, which despite being called for parents, I use it as an adult for stuff I can't stand watching, because they have like really detailed but brief descriptions of like pretty much every violent, gory thing that would happen in like even every season of a show. And also movies, and like there's no timestamps, but and they do stuff like sex and drinking and what like other stuff as well, but I use it for the gore because I haven't found another website that will give me that level of detail as to like what kind of gore it's going to have. Yeah.
Thank you for those resources. And that we didn't go deeply into it, but that was death was one of the 4 fakes, and we don't really have access to death as a culture. I mean, it's really put away. Like a lived experience of it is pretty difficult to access. So I feel like it's even more important to recognize that how it's really stylized and fictionalized and staged, and all of that is really important to understand, or to like set a foundation of understanding around death and how it's portrayed in media and culture. And that's really important to me as a family, even though we're fine, like, you know, we've gone through transitions of gore, not gore, you know, exposure, you know. My point has always been to just recognize what like stylized violence looks like versus like the lived experience of violence. And they're not the same, and one does not lead to the other necessarily. I think there's a lot more nuance there than that. So. Oh, interesting. I don't know. That's almost like lots of shooting, but no blood. And that's almost like a problem unto itself, isn't it?
Yeah, like that's what I'm always pointing out in Marvel movies, is how they're doing lots of physical harm to each other. But what, you know, that's always my pause during the Marvel movies. It's like just pointing out.
I heard Kevin Smith talk about this, about how he was handling the director of Clerks and all of that, but how he as a parent was fine with this kind of like stylized Marvel kind of violence, especially at the young ages where you're not really emotionally ready to handle like violence and death. And so this is just kind of like the play to kind of like peek beyond the curtain of this really difficult concept. And so when he kind of framed it that way, that like this is like the play violence, these are movies about play violence. And then when you're more ready and mature to handle like content about, you know, real violence, watch things that can really like educate you and inform you about big issues. My mom took me to her classes at college when I was a kid, and we watched like Gandhi. I was like 13 watching Gandhi in this university classroom. It really like changed my perspective of the world, right? So you can find these places when people are ready and want to see them. Movies and media can be a powerful tool for that. And that was definitely like one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you guys today, no matter what kind of like boundaries or things that you have around screens and media, like try to use those windows of opportunity to discuss, to dissect, you know, to get ahead of, and to like, you know, talk about how media is a reflection of our culture, and you know, how we can do that personally, and how we can do that in our communities and in our creative work. So just use all of these times to build connection with the youth that you work with and the youth in your life for the better. So they're not like closing our breakout room. Do we have more time? I feel like I should.
It's like 30 seconds.
There, 30 seconds plus the extra 60 seconds.
Yeah. My teen and I were watching a YouTube video. They watch a lot of video essays dissecting media, and they were watching American Exceptionalism, a comparison between The Boys and Captain America. It was really fascinating. You know, just it was an hour that I got to spend with a 16-year-old learning about white supremacy and American exceptionalism through this media. And I was just actually really thankful for living in a time where we have access to that kind of deep thought around it. So I will see you guys in the main room. I'm excited for this panel as well.